Last week, I introduced you to 3 practices, and I just want to quickly run down these. If you need a recap, go rewatch the video. Go look through the workbook. In the workbook, I did give you little snippets of the topics as well, so you wouldn't have to listen through the whole thing again. So you've got a myriad of ways to make sure you understand these 3 principles. But last week, the 3 practices, that you need to put in place were identifying the daily habit that the person you're working to become would have. So asking yourself, if I want to be the Nana who is full of adventure and fun and can keep up with her grandkids, and her grandkids think of as being the fun Nana that we love to go visit because she always has fun things for us to do, what do I need to do today to be that woman? How do I need to fuel myself? How do I need to be active? What kinds of things do I need to do to support that woman today? Because that woman's not going to become that woman overnight. She needs to have incremental, we're going to talk about incremental things a lot today, incremental shifts towards that so that when the day arrives, she arrives, right? Does that make sense? So then we wanted to identify the one habit, because obviously the person you're working to become has multiple habits, has multiple things they're working on. Maybe things that they don't do that you're currently doing that you need to also rid out of your life. But you can't tackle all of that at once. That's what sets us up for that cycle of perfection. Perfection hell is what I would call it. And so we need to identify the one needle mover. I'm not going to go into all the details. Go back over last week's lessons if you need to, session if you need to. But you need to identify that one tiny habit that is a needle mover but not impossible. And then practice number 3, and this is a practice, you guys, you're going to keep repeating this. Once you master the first tiny habit, then you look at that list and you pick the one that makes the most sense to add on to it. And you keep stacking habit after habit, okay? Pretty soon, now you have mastered 50 of the things that this man or this woman would be doing, and you've done it in incremental shifts that are sustainable and doable and not overwhelming. So you're going to keep repeating these 3 practices over and over, and apply these to every area of your freaking life. It will make a difference. But you're going to do that 3rd practice of, now that you've got the identity, the habits, the one habit picked, now you're going to set a minimum and a stretch goal for that habit on a weekly basis. And every week you're going to reassess how you did in that habit and if you need to adjust that minimum and stretch goal. I actually do a weekly practice with my clients every Sunday where we do a weekly review. What I'll do is later on this week, I will post that weekly review for you guys along with a short video that will explain how to use it, because that will help you understand how to then ascertain for the next week moving forward, am I ready to add another habit, or do I need to keep working on this one? Because we want you to have a level of mastery of this where it's really become automatic for you. It's not something you're still struggling with before you add another one. Okay, so those 3 practices are very key, and they are going to be continued throughout your life, and you can apply them wherever you will. But if you did the workbook, if you walked through the activities and the action steps that I gave you, you're probably showing up this week in one of 2 states. Number 1, you may be overjoyed because you're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea this could be so simple. I didn't know it could be so simple to have a successful week. All these years I've been telling you, I've been piling this stuff on top of my week that it had to be perfect, and I could never feel success, but this week was the first week in a long time I felt success around these types of goals. Or you feel underwhelmed. And the reason we're tempted to feel underwhelmed is because sometimes the simplicity of one tiny habit makes us feel really leery that this simple thing, this tiny habit creation, could ever really create a snowball. And we're really worried that it's going to take too long. And if you have a personality like mine, you're more likely to feel that way. Because for a personality like mine, unless something feels hard, or like we're really having to push through it and show up our best and all that kind of stuff. I was raised as a Marine, so like everything in life was like at that level as a child. But if it doesn't seem like I have to show up at that level to actually do something. It feels like nothing will happen. It feels almost pointless to do because you can't imagine something big or something even profitable in the smallest sense coming from such a simple action. So if you're like me and you have that personality type, I really want you to understand the power of progression. And I'm going to give you an illustration today to kind of to give you basically a story to kind of tuck in your pocket and pull out when you're feeling like things are taking too long, because those tiny shifts, because they are so simple, because they are so doable, because they are something that you pretty soon don't have to like grunt through to do, and they become your automatic state more easily, because of those characteristics is why it works. So don't get yourself in a mess if you have a personality type like mine, thinking that, oh my gosh, I feel a little underwhelmed about this, how would this ever work? Trust me, even my personality type, when we apply this, we'll see the power of it. So just, if nothing else, trust me. But I do want to give you this little illustration that James Clear, he is the author of Atomic Habits. I've quoted this book and shared things last week. Part of what we talked about came from his book, as I noted before. And this illustration comes from his book. And so I want to give this to you as like that little thing to carry in your pocket. Hold on one second. Sorry, I got a piece of gum I took stuck in my mouth there. So I want you to be able to take this little story in your pocket and pull out and review over and over and over again when you're feeling like this is a little underwhelming, okay? So, and that is understanding the power of tiny 1-degree shifts and latent potential. So what is latent potential? We all are familiar with this. We see it in all different areas of life in the world. But basically, it boils down to potential, or the power of possibility in a thing that's existing. It's there, but it's hidden from the eye right now, or it's not fully actualized yet. But it does have the potential. So he actually gives multiple examples, but a quick example is the tectonic plates, right? Like, so they shift and they grind and they shift and they grind. They have little earthquakes. They have little volcanic eruptions that just happen over time. But never does the entire, tectonic plate shift and create, a great tsunami or anything, except for every once in a very great while. Now, while, you're on a cruise ship over the ocean, over that tectonic plate that's shifting and grinding, there is absolutely the potential that today could be the day it has a significant shift, because that constant pressure has built up to a potential that's just not actualized yet. But once that shift takes place, you see the power underneath it and it's fully actualized, right? So that is a good picture of latent potential, something that has a ton of power in it but is not yet seen or actualized. But our systems and our aligning ourselves with the person we want to become has an immense amount of latent potential when we follow through with the habits that person would have. The thing is when they're tiny, we often are willing to poo-poo the results. We're often willing to second guess ourselves or belittle the small results, because we think that they're of no importance. Just like when I'm in a cruise ship and that cruise ship is going over the tectonic plate, my thinking there's a little consequence to it does not take away from the actual power of the thing, right? So don't get yourself screwed in your head, all screwed up in your head, thinking there's no actual power in the little things that you are not seeing just under the surface. And the illustration that James Clear gives in this little analogy I'm going to give you perfectly describes this. So he says, imagine that you walk into a room and there is an ice cube on, say, the table, the counter, and the room is noticeably cold, like very cold. And you need that ice cube to melt because you need to drink some water. So you need that ice to melt. And you kind of look around, you find a thermostat, and you realize that it is only 25 degrees in there. And so obviously, if you need that ice cube to melt, we're gonna need to go up at a minimum 7 degrees before it even starts to change its state into water, liquid, right? So you adjust the thermostat, but you realize that you're only going to raise the temperature 1 degree every 30 minutes based on what you can see the furnace has the capacity to heat in. Meaning, if you tried to crank it higher or load more habits on, right? If you tried to crank it higher, it would overwhelm the furnace, it would overwhelm the system, and it would crash, and you would never get it warm enough in there because the furnace could not heat consistently long enough at that level of power that you're requiring of it to ever get to the level of melting the ice cube. So you're in this freezing cold room, you need the ice cube to melt, you turn up the furnace and you realize you're gonna have to go 7 degrees, but you can only go up 1 degree every 30 minutes. So you've got at least 3.5 hours before you can even start to see any change in the state of that ice cube. And even after that, that's not gonna mean you get to drink it yet, right? Because it still has to melt from the ice cube stage to the water stage. Now the great thing is, once it heats up to that 32 degrees, it's a lot quicker in being able to melt down to something that is truly your goal, to have a glass of water. But as you sit there and you watch it, and the room raises 1 degree, and then an hour later it raises another degree, and maybe 2.5 hours into this, somebody walks into the room and is like, what are you doing? You're sitting here looking at an ice cube in a freezing room. They cannot see that you've already moved halfway or beyond, more than halfway, to the goal you need to achieve, because that potential is still hiding underneath, or in this situation is still covered by the cold room, right? Because every degree that you get closer to the 32 degrees, you're that much closer to your goal. But until you actually reach 32 degrees, you will see nothing change about that ice cube. So everything around it, the environment, the situation is actually moving in the right direction. The trajectory is going where you need it to go. But until you get to that tipping point, you're in a plateau. It looks like nothing's happening. It looks like, oh gosh, maybe I should go turn up the heater. Maybe I should see if there's a blow dryer I can, use. You start to go a little bit nutty because of the length of time it's taking for you to see change. But the reality is, everything about what it takes to get that ice cube to begin melting is going on, because incrementally, consistently, half hour after half hour, the room is raising by 1 degree. Now, the other thing I want to point out here is, in a cold room, you and I are never going to notice the difference between 25 and 27 degrees. That is still freaking cold. When it hits 30 degrees, it still feels just as cold as 27, right? So all the things that I feel in that room, no matter how true that feels to me, is not true to the situation of the ice cube. The ice cube is being affected by that room's temperature rising because it's getting closer and closer to the ability to go from frozen state to liquid state. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind, because oftentimes when we're sitting there looking at that proverbial ice cube, we start to wonder if anything's happening. We start to wonder if maybe there's another way we should be going about that. When somebody else comes in and looks at our ice cube and tells us we're crazy, we really start to second guess ourselves. But the reality is, this is truth. Latent potential is lying underneath that. If you are consistently moving in the right direction towards melting the ice cube, or whatever your goal is, then you will achieve it if you stay consistent. It's just like Like for example, if you were, say, you're wanting to save money, right? Like it's the consistent adding to your savings account. You don't suddenly become secure financially because you were added, $100 every paycheck into your savings account. But the potential, because you're going in the right direction, even though the goal is not reached yet, the trajectory is more important. Matter of fact, he gives, James gives an example in Atomic Habits of this that I love. It just came to mind as you were saying this. He talks about if you're a millionaire and you are living beyond your means as a millionaire, you are far worse off than the person who is currently broke but is not living above their means and is adding into their IRA or their savings account or saving up money for an investment. That person who is currently broke but is actually taking action in the direction he wants to go versus a millionaire who is living beyond his means. It is what matters as far as who really has the security, right? Who really is on the right track. The millionaire may have reached his goal of becoming a millionaire, but the goal of sustained security is not there because of his daily actions. And the broke person may not have reached his goal yet, but his trajectory is moving him towards where the millionaire's is moving him away. So you've got to look at what direction am I headed? Are the choices I'm making today warming that room up by a degree every 30 minutes? Is it adding $1 into my bank so I go from broke to independent financially? Or am I regressing and creating habits and moving away from the person that I am working to become? So keep in mind that latent potential and the 1 degree shift. You've probably heard me, if you've been around in the group for a while, talk about 1 degree shifts a lot because we use this analogy a lot with my clients because it is so powerful. And that's what I want you to be looking for is what 1 degree shift can I make today? That habit that you picked last week, that tiny habit that was a needle mover, that is your 1 degree shift habit, okay? Because if you're consistent with it, it will move you towards actualizing that goal. So I do want to say that there is a little caveat here. So one thing that I want you to think about is with this 1 degree shift picture and illustration, once that ice cube starts to melt, and I alluded to this a minute or two ago, once the ice cube starts to melt, but it's still ice with just a little bit of puddle of water around it, it still has not actualized your goal yet, right? So if in seeing that ice cube start to melt, you get impatient because now I see it's working, but you don't stay the course with the system that worked up to this point, and you start to, oh gosh, okay, I'm here, let's, add some more fuel on the fire, let's, maybe if I throw this in and I do this diet that my friend is, I've lost the first 5 pounds, maybe if I start doing this instead of that, it will help me, get over this hump. No, stay the course because you're not gonna get to drink the water if you break the furnace, okay? So what actually makes the difference is trusting the system that created the result thus far, all right? So I say this because I don't want you guys to start to see the ice cube melt, if you will, and then fall back into your, oh, I gotta be perfect now, right? Fall back into, if I, don't do this exactly right, I'm going to destroy everything mindset. We still need to keep the mindset focused on the progress and the 1 tiny degree shifts incrementally, okay? So, matter of fact, the system that you have is so much more important than the goal, okay? And let me give you a little illustration. So, if you have the correct system in place and you just keep doing that system, you will continue to move down toward the path to reach and even surpass your goal. But if you reach a goal but you didn't change anything about how you got to the non-desired state, then pretty soon you'll find yourself right back to at that non-desired state. We have to change the system that got us to where we didn't want to be in order to stay away from returning there again. All right, so let me just give you a quick example. We have a messy garage, okay? If you have a messy garage and you say, okay, that's it, I can't stand it anymore, it needs to be cleaned up, I can't handle needing to move this box to find that thing, and it's just, we got to get this organized. And you can spend all Saturday, all Sunday, just sweating like a dog in that garage, filthy, grimy, dirty, get it all organized, stand back, feel the relief, like, oh my gosh, it looks so beautiful. You keep going out there checking because it looks so perfect. I know y'all have done this, I have. You're just like, I just love it. And you're so excited. And you've spent days getting it into this great state. And then guess what? If you didn't change the habit that got you the messy garage, a month from now, 2 months from now, 3 months from now, what are you gonna have? If the habits of tossing things here, not putting things up where they belonged, not using the organizational tools that you have in place, but you're just not using them, if that's been your habits and you never changed it, I don't care how many days you spend in that garage cleaning it up and making it look pretty. All you're doing is washing a pig, right? The pig's still gonna go return right back to what it looked like before because nothing has changed about how you got there, all right? It is the system and that you use, that you implement, that you take part in, that will allow you to go from, okay, I now have a system in place, I have the habits of I'm going to do this when I come home, I'm going to do this with the tools that I use, or I'm going to do this with the garden stuff, and I'm going to implement the organizational structure that I have here. And once you decide to actually set up a system and use the system, then you get a different outcome. And the same is with our fitness goals. I mean, think about it. How many of you, I'm sure every single one of you, because you're human, like if this is not true of you, you probably don't belong in this group. But how many of you have lost 35 pounds and you grunted through it, you tried to be perfect, you ate only anything that was supposed to be eaten and did all of your workouts and like couldn't wait till the finish line of that 12 weeks being over when you could do X, Y, and Z, and then found yourself 6 months or 9 months later, 35 pounds heavier. The reason that that happens is not because you suck or incapable. That's not true. Those are lies. The reason that happened is you never had a system. You had a good goal. The goal was good. Lose 35 pounds. I'll feel more energetic. I will be able to fit into my jeans and not have to buy a whole new wardrobe for the fall. I will X, Y, and Z. It was a good goal. But it does not matter how good your goal is if your system sucks, okay? If the system is broken and you haven't changed anything about it, you will get the same results. So what we're going to cover today is how to set up the system that will create the habits that you need to have in place and will create them in a manner that basically goes on autopilot. Once you set up the system and you apply the tools that I'm going to give you today, the dredging through trying to create a habit, the weeks and weeks, if not months, of trying to perfect a habit, I thought that I was doing really well for a week and then I fell off the wagon. It took me 4 more weeks to get back on again. Drudgery of creating a healthy habit, a good habit, a habit that's going to support who you're working to become will end when you start using the system. So grab your pens and papers if you don't have them already. Actually, this will all be in the workbook for you, but it's good to have some notes to write down questions and stuff or put those right in the text. And I'm going to take another drink really quick. All right, so, and matter of fact, let's just cover this for a second. You might be like, okay, so what's the difference then? What's the difference between having a good goal, which, you know, a goal is good, so I'm not saying goals are bad, we've talked about them here, just the right kind of goal is what you want to focus on, and having a system. Well, if you think about it this way, goals are good for direction, Okay, goals give us like the overall view of where we're working to go. The what our end result, we want our end result to be. But a goal in and of itself will never get you there. It takes a system to get you to the goal. So I can have a great goal like I want to lose 35 pounds because I would feel X, Y, and Z, and that would be wonderful. But if that goal, you have no clue of how to handle all the obstacles you've had in the past, you don't know how to overcome them, you're going to just stumble along into them again, then you're not going to have any different results. So a system is like having a map. So let's say I wanted to travel to Cocoa Beach in Florida. Well, that sounds really fun, and I know the general direction I need to go. I know that, I need to head southeast, and I need to do that for about 3 days. And if I just stay southeast for 3 days, I probably will eventually at least find somebody who is familiar with how to get to Florida, right? But if I have a system like GPS or a map, if I know where I'm going to stop and refuel, if I understand how to get information about the travel I'm doing, then that system will allow me to get to the end result of wanting to go to Florida. Okay, so think of it that way. We need a goal. That goal is the identity of who you're wanting to become. And our system is, what habits would that person have, and how do I align myself with it? And this is the part we're going to go over tonight, how do I make the creation of those habits as pain-free as possible and as take hold of my life as quickly as possible, okay? So I want to, that's what we're going to cover today, is those two things. So the things that we need to have in this system is it needs to be actionable. So last week, we identified what one tiny habit was going to be a needle mover for you. And I told you to set a minimum and a stretch goal on it. And I gave you some ideas of how to brainstorm how to make that work, right? But we didn't actually require or align that with an actionable step. I gave you actionable steps to come to those conclusions, but now we want to put that in an actionable step. So if last week you struggled a little bit with reaching your minimum goal, that's okay. This week, when you apply these 3 things to the minimum and stretch goal, you're going to see it works like magic, okay? So it needs to be actionable, meaning there are specific steps I know I need to take to reach this, okay? It needs to be simple, meaning I can't have 9 obstacles in front of me even being able to reach this one thing, right? So we need to have it simple. And we need to have it applied incrementally. And what I mean by that is we're not trying to raise that temperature of the room by 30 degrees in 2 minutes, okay? We understand that incremental raising the temperature of the room is what's going to get me there. And so my system is actionable, meaning I know what I need to do, when, where, and how. It's actionable. I put in action steps to get there. Those action steps are simple. They're not going to take me months to be able to actually even be capable of doing. And I am patient and understand that they are incremental. I'm going to continue to build on them one little small increment at a time, okay? So that we're not overwhelming the furnace, if you will, okay? So last week, I want you to think about your minimum and stretch goal. So hopefully you've got that minimum and stretch goal in your mind. And with that minimum and stretch goal, I want you to think about how can I make, like, what, if I was the person who was going to do ... So let's just use, last week I used the example of taking lunch to work. And so just keeping with that theme, just so that it has a nice, just solid line through it, and you can see how to take a goal like this from the beginning to completion, let's just stick with that. So let's say you said to yourself, okay, my minimum goal is I want to take my lunch 3 days a week, and my stretch goal is I want to take it 5 days a week, because I believe the person who I am working to become would honor their body and honor the goals that they have by nourishing their body this way. So this is my minimum stretch goal. The next thing you need to do is ask yourself, well, if I were a person who was going to take my lunch 3 to 5 days a week, what would I need to do to have that actually happen, right? So this is where the simple comes in. We don't want this to be, like I used the example of Starbucks last week, right? We don't want this to be so hard that the steps to even get to the point where you could give up Starbucks is not anything that's going to be achievable this week, right? So you need to ask yourself, what steps, if I were the person who took my lunch 3 to 5 days a week, what steps would I need to do? What things would I need to have done ahead of time to be successful in that endeavor? And you're going to jot down those things. So maybe it is, I would need to make sure I had groceries available. I would need to make sure that I had lunch made before I left for work and take it to work. I would need to, so you go through the list. And as you go through the list, you start to realize, okay, so how can this be implemented in my life? So what actionable steps could I do? What this is called in research and science about habits and psychology and behavioral training is the implementation intention. So for every habit to have a solid grounding and realistic possibility to take hold, we need to have what's called an implementation intention. So what all that means is, how am I going to implement or make this actionable of what my intention is? My intention is to take my lunch 3 to 5 days a week. What do I need to implement to make that happen? And in that implementation, it's made up of 3 things. It's when will I do this thing? How will I do this thing? And where will I do this thing? So the habit of taking my lunch to work 3 to 5 days a week, what things need to be done, and when, where, and how will I do those smaller steps that need to be accomplished for me to be able to take my lunch, okay? So I might think to myself, well, I'm going to take my lunch 5 days a week, so I'm gonna pack it in the morning because then my lunch is fresh and it'll taste a little bit better by the time we get to lunchtime. And as long as I get up 5 minutes earlier, that shouldn't be a problem. And so that's my goal. I'm going to get up 5 minutes earlier, pack it in the morning in the kitchen, when, where, and how, right? I'm also going to make sure that I always have fresh groceries in the house every Tuesday and Sunday or whatever days, so that it is easy for me to just pull together a lunch in the mornings and I'm not scrambling, I'm not left with nothing to make lunches. So those are my implementation intentions of how I'm going to make sure that I'm able to follow through. But now step 2 of this process of our system is to do something called habit stacking. That's what James Clear calls it. It's called a whole bunch of different names in different behavioral science research, but he calls it habit stacking. It's simple, easy way to really view what's going on. And this habit stacking is the key. So number 1, I need to understand what actually needs to be done and determine how, when, and where I'm going to perform this, okay? But number 2, how do I make that happen? Because all of us, every single one of us have said, oh, starting on Monday, I'm going to do whatever that thing is, right? Whatever it is. And then we get to Monday and we forgot. Or we forgot to go to bed early enough on Sunday to be able to do the thing on Monday. Or we got to Wednesday and something happened and so it fell all to pieces and we only got 2 days in on creating this habit, so we start again on Monday and it's that cycle all over again, right? So how can we overcome that broken cycle? It's not just enough to say, gosh, I guess if I was going to take my lunches, I better have some groceries available and I better get up 5 minutes earlier so it's not insane at my house trying to get my lunch ready. Well, the way we do that is with the habit stacking. So this really is the trick, okay? So what I want you to do first is I want you to identify that habit. Now, maybe this is the same habit from last week and you need to continue working on it for mastery. So write down the habit. And yes, I do want you to write it down. And this is why, you guys, I don't care whether you print out the action packets or you get a journal and you write out the answers in the action packets, but I will tell you, research shows over and over and over again that if you write down what you're committing to do, not just think it in your head, not even just say it out loud, but write down what you're committing to do, you are far greater likelihood to complete it. There's research, they did like an experiment, this was actually in England, where they went into a doctor's office and they just wanted to perform an experiment. So they said, hey, I just want you to track the number up until now of how many rescheduled appointments you have on in general. If people missed an appointment or they called last minute when you called to confirm the appointments that they had to reschedule, what's that number? And then we just want you to change one tiny thing, and that is, rather than you writing down on the little card your next appointment is X, Y, and Z date, and handing them the card, instead we want you to hand them the card and the pen and have them write it down. I'm going to show up at 2:30. So same little card, you're just filling in the blanks. Because we want to be in alignment and congruent with who we say we are and what we are committing to, when we write it down, that gives us a whole other layer of commitment to who we say we want to show up as. And in doing that, we are more likely to follow through. I believe, I could be wrong, I have to go back to the book for sure, but I believe in this little experiment, they're reassigning or canceled appointments or needing to be rescheduled appointments dropped by 23%, if I recall right. It was a huge number. And all they changed, the only thing they changed is they had the people write down. He also gives in Atomic Habits an example of people who said, oh yes, I think it's important to vote. Voting is important. It's a great civic duty and a great right that we have. We should vote. And people who actually wrote down the time that they were going to vote, who they were going to go with if they had somebody they're going with, and looked up and wrote down the address of the polling center that they had to vote at, that those people who took those extra steps of writing it down and planning it out actually showed up to vote at significant numbers more. And this was from a group of people who every one of them felt that taking the time to vote was important, but the people who wrote it down committed at a deeper level simply because of the writing. So I said all that to say, write it down, okay? I'm just saying this because I know it'll help you so much. So write down, this is my minimum and this is my stretch goal for the week. And I'm going to do it, I'm going to do the action that needs to take place. I'm going to implement that at this time and this place, and this is how I'm going to do it, okay? And then the next step is the habit stacking. So let's go back to the creating lunches. And I'm just going to create an imaginary scenario that I think a lot of us can relate to. Let's say I said, I'm going to pack my lunch in the morning. And I thought to myself, okay, well, what habit can I stack this with? So habit stacking, what happens is, if we can take a habit, all of us have them, right? A habit that we do unconsciously now. Okay, so I brush my teeth unconsciously. I don't have to get myself motivated to do it. I don't, have to think about doing it. I don't, there's basic habits that we all have that are automatic. For me personally, and there are things that you do without having to think about. So sometimes we're like, gosh, did I do that? Did I remember to do that? Because it's so automatic, we don't have to think about it. We have lots of those throughout our day. Matter of fact, a majority of our day are made up of automatic habits like this. And so what you need to do is find a habit that happens at the same frequency that would align with your new habit that you could join together. So let me give you an example. If you were like, okay, so what I'm going to do is I want to get up 5 minutes early to make my lunch. That makes sense because the frequency of 5 days a week, I get up and I leave for work. So if I get up 5 minutes earlier, then that's the same frequency, right? 5 days a week, 5 days a week. Frequency is the same. Okay, so that works. Obviously, if you're trying to habit stack and the thing you want to accomplish is 5 days a week, and the thing you're tying it to only happens once a week or intermittently throughout the week, but you don't know which day, it's not a good habit to stack it with. This habit that you're stacking with or tying it to needs to happen at the same rate, same frequency as you want the new habit to, because you really are tying them together. Okay, you're joining them together. So if I thought about, okay, so in the morning, I go to work 5 days a week, I want to take my lunch 5 days a week, the frequency is there, then I ask myself, I go through the implementation intention questions. So how would I do that? Well, I would go downstairs and I would gather the stuff in the kitchen. When I would do that would be after I'm done getting dressed. I'm all ready for the day and it's the last 5 minutes of the morning. So that seems to work. And then I start thinking through, is there a habit I could tie that to? Is there a specific thing? Well, yeah, I come down into the kitchen. Okay, good, but how am I going to tie that to being 5 minutes earlier, right? Because if my body clock, I'm in the bathroom and I'm getting ready and I know, oh, it takes me about this long and my internal alarm hasn't gone off that I need to go downstairs, I may just go with the natural internal alarm all the way up until past the 5 minutes I needed, right? So you need to have a trigger for the beginning of the new habit. The beginning of this new habit would be I'm going to wake up 5 minutes early so that I can be down in my kitchen 5 minutes early so that I can take that 5 minutes to make my lunch. So if I cannot tie that to a first trigger that's already my habit, when I come down in the kitchen, well, when I come down in the kitchen right now, my habit is I'm kind of running around like a crazy person. And the kids are saying, oh, Mom, I forgot this. Or, oh, can I have some lunch money? Or, oh, I forgot that we have a field trip and I wanted to be able to take $5. Do you have any cash? And that's actually the habit of my morning routine. Well, then coming down 5 minutes into that kind of chaos may not be the fertile ground I need for creating a solid goal. There's nothing consistent other than chaos that happens every morning 5 minutes before I leave for work that I can tie this habit to. So I might think, okay, I really don't think 3 days of the week, if I think about my schedule, 3 days of the week in the morning, do I realistically think that 3 days out of 5, I have enough calmness that if I came down 5 minutes early, I would always be able to consistently get my lunch ready? No, because it's always one thing or another, right? I've raised 5 children, I've parented 5 children. I know it can always be one thing or another. Even just my own adulting, it's often always one thing or another, right? So then I'm analyzing this and I'm walking you guys through this process so you can see how to determine which habit you need to join the new habit to. Which existing habit? So if the existing habit is, well, I always come down into the kitchen and gather up my stuff before I leave, that's going to be when I make my lunch. But when I analyze actually when, how, and where I would do that, and I see what that situation feels like, is that conducive to something I could be consistent with? And if it's not, then I'm already setting myself up for failure. So now I want to set that idea aside and say, okay, what would be a better situation? So what is another habit that I do every single day, at least 5 days a week, so it is the same rhythm of the new habit I want to create, and it is consistent. I know I can just depend on this thing and the situation that surrounds it to be able to be consistent enough to at least reach my minimum goal and work on reaching my stretch goal every single week. So analyzing that, you might think, okay, mornings are out. There's no way. Fresh lunch would be great, but that's not going to happen. What could if I rewound and looked back a little bit, what habit do I have that's already in place that I don't think about, that is at the same rhythm of the new habit I want to create, that I could tie this new habit to? Because I already do the first one automatically without thinking, it becomes the trigger for the new one to start. What in my life could I come up with? Well, for me, that is cleaning up dinner at night, right? And also this is double duty because a lot of times what I take the next day for my lunch, or I also try to make my husband a healthy lunch, what I'm taking is leftovers, or at least part of what we had for dinner. So if I made like a cucumber salad and we have leftovers from that night, well then me putting up the cucumber salad that night because of dinner is over, which I'm going to do every single night that we eat dinner, right, which is every night, that I then would just automatically pack that into a little bowl for myself for the next day and put a little chicken in it, to have a little bit of chicken with it, and voila, there's my lunch, right? So if I was thinking about this, I could say, okay, one of the things habits that I just do, I never go to bed without cleaning up the kitchen. I'm never going to go to bed with food laying out on the counter. There is never going to be a time that I don't take the time to clean up dinner mess. So, and that happens nightly, definitely 5 days a week. So the rhythm of it works, and it is a very solid habit that is consistent that I can tie to. So then my habit that I'm tying it to, my trigger habit, is every night when I clean up dinner, I will also pack my lunch for the next day. And pretty soon, the trigger of I'm just packing my lunch or I'm just cleaning up dinner means I'm also starting to portion this out into the bowls for lunch for tomorrow as well, okay? So that creates an ease and gets rid of the obstacles, makes it easy for you to follow through with that. So habit stacking means I have identified a habit that happens at the same ratio, that is consistent enough that I can trust that I can tie my new habit to. I am in control of the environment around it. It's not absolute chaos when I'm not going to be able to have 5 minutes. I'm not in full control of the situation, or at least as much as we can be in life, right? There is a consistency here. And because I can see that happens, I'm now going to use it this trigger. So taking your implementation intention and filling that out now and really solidifying what you're doing, you're going to, one, pick your tiny habit, your 1 degree shift that you identified as what you know the person you're working to become would have as a new habit that is doable, easy, and now we're going to make actionable, right? So actionable is going to be now, if I'm going to be the person who takes their lunch to work, then I would need to make sure that I have it made before the next day. Otherwise, I'm setting myself up for failure. And so the time I'm going to do this is in the evening when I'm cleaning up dinner. The place is going to be in the kitchen, and the when is at dinner time or as I'm cleaning up dinner. So you can just break that all down, the when, where, and how I'm going to do this. How? Well, gosh, I've already probably got half of my lunch made because it's leftovers from dinner. Easy to put up. I have to put it up anyways. I can just put it in a smaller container for me to take to lunch, right? The trigger of cleaning up and putting away is a good trigger for me to be like, oh yeah, I gotta clean up and put away my lunch and get everything ready. Also, as we're winding down in the evening and we go through that ritual mentally, whether we realize it or not, is all about getting ready for the next day, right? As I wind down tonight, I'm really prepping myself for the next day. So you're already in that mindset. So it's a really good match for a habit stacking practice. So you're going to then write down in your implementation intention how you're going to implement this intention based on the habit you're going to stack it with. And you're going to write it all down, and you're going to be very specific on it. All right, you guys. So I hope that is helpful. Oh, my door just opened. I thought maybe my husband was peeking in, but it's just like nobody. The AC must have kicked on or something. So I hope that is crystal clear for you on the importance of not overlooking the tiny 1 degree shift, that it's not about arriving at the goal or being at the goal already, but where are you headed? What is your trajectory? Is your habit today moving you closer or further away from where you want to be? And how can I make this actionable and ground in and surrounded by other habits so that it becomes just very easy, just part of the rhythm of my day? I'm not trying to create a whole new rhythm. I'm just joining a new habit to a rhythm I already have. And that coupling of the habits together creates a powerhouse. Then once you get that, oh gosh, now I don't even have to think about making my lunch anymore. My lunch, I literally am cleaning up dinner and I'm just making lunch, and it's not, I've actually been able to reach my stretch goal 2 weeks in a row. Awesome. Now we're going to look at that list and start to do the same thing with your next tiny